My name is Zetta Ottenberg. I'm 98 years old, and I know Ryan because he's my grandson.
And so, how old were you in 1939 when war was declared on Germany?
1939. I was born in 1919, so I was 20.
And where did you live?
Lived in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania.
Which is where in Pennsylvania?
It's about 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
Okay. What did you do in 1939? Did you have an occupation?
No. We got married in 1939.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or 1940. I forget which. 40, I believe.
Yeah. And did you ever hear just people talking or on the radio about Mussolini or Hitler or Stalin?
Just on the radio. We didn't even get a newspaper at that time. We just got our news from the radio.
And what was the general feeling about them, or what was your feelings about them?
Well, of course, we were concerned as to how many of my brothers or my husband might have to go to war. And they wanted to get back at the Japanese, of course, because the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And so that's how actually the war started, because Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and bombed some of the ships that were our ships that were located in the harbor there.
Yeah. Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
In front of the radio, on a little hassock, footrest. And they came on and announced that the United States had declared war on Japan. And of course, you get real excited and worried as to what's going to happen. And it turned out that it really was a world war. It seemed like all the countries got involved and were fighting, and millions of men died. They actually have no count. They don't know actually to this day how many men died during this war. Two or three countries had over 1 million men. I think one country was Japan and one country was Germany that had so many die.
How was your community affected by the war?
Well, of course, a lot of young men had to go to war. They were drafted, what then was called drafted. They had a number, and if their number came up, then they had to go off to war. And my husband worked in a defense plant, drove about, I would say, 50-mile one way to work, and some days would work long hours because they were making shells in the plant where he worked.
Artillery shells.
Yes, so if they needed a lot of shells, then they worked overtime to make these shells. And so that's what happened to him during that time. He worked, and the day the war was over, he was told he was they didn't say laid off, they just told him he was done at the factory because the war was over, so they no longer needed the shells.
Right. Huh. So he worked at the defense plant for making the
All
shells?
during the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he wasn't drafted?
No. Because he was married.
Were any of your brothers drafted?
Two brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Both my brothers went to war. They were drafted. I guess they could have gotten out of it because we lived on a farm, and of course they needed the crops that were raised for food and to feed the animals, that they were butchering. And but they said no, they would go and do their parts. So they both went to I think they were both in the Army, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Do you know where they served?
No, I don't remember.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know whether we knew for sure exactly where they were.
They didn't have the internet back then, so it wasn't like just dropping a text message or sending an email. They had to write letters.
You could just call if you had the money, but they didn't always have the money.
Right.
Because a lot of these young fellas were married and sent their money home to their families to take care of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So Grandpa built shells in the plant. Did you do anything for the war effort?
I gave blood. I gave 8 pints of blood, I think it was, during the wartime. Yeah.
So that's every 6 months or
right.
Every
and but then they stopped me from giving blood because they found out that I had yellow jaundice as a kid. So then they stopped taking my blood. Yeah.
How did your feelings toward Germany change during wartime? Because I know, our ancestry goes back to Germany, and what was there? Did you have mixed feelings about going to war with Germany, or
well,
was there tension in your family or extended family?
There was no tension in the family that I know of, but of course. Everybody was concerned who had relatives in Germany because, of course, we invaded Europe, and of course they felt that they would get to Germany, which they did. And so it was a very hard time. Some people had a lot of hatred towards the Germans, and then others didn't seem to. They realized it was war, and that was one of the things that happened in the world, and so they just did their part and carried on.
Did it seem like people knew what the Germans were, or what the Nazis were doing to the German population, especially the Jews, at the time?
I don't think at the time. We knew they were being put in concentration camps, but we didn't realize how bad the concentration camps were. And I don't think we ever realized until we talked to some people that were put in concentration camps. And of course, we have a family in our church who was put in a concentration camp
Mm-hmm.
and was there several years.
Mm-hmm.
And the father sometimes was taken off, and they had no idea where he was.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the rest of the family just stayed in this concentration camp. And the way they treated them was worse than some animal,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
A lot of them were killed.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do what the Germans wanted, they killed them. Yeah.
Sad. What's one of your most powerful memories from the time of World War II? Obviously, besides getting married and
Like getting married. I guess the rationing of food. You were given a card, and like you could buy so many pounds of sugar at one time, or many other items that they had. You were only allowed to buy so much of it because of the shortage, and the shortage came, of course, because of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it wasn't an easy time.
No. It was probably the most difficult time of our married life.
Mm-hmm. During the Depression.
Right.
And then during the
Yes.
war as well, I'm guessing you had
Yes.
a garden then too, like a victory garden.
Well, and we had a big family, so we had a good many cards. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so you were married during the war, living not on the farm?
No, we were living in an apartment in
Yeah.
Scottsdale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was there like a community garden that you could
No,
grow?
we had a garden down at my family's farm.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that probably helped supplement with
Yeah.
the rationing then?
Right.
Do you remember hearing about the bombing of Hiroshima?
Yes.
What do you remember about that?
I guess what I remember mostly is how many people were killed and how much damage that it did. And I thought, oh my, what a horrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we need those things. I guess each thinks they're going to be the best and have the biggest bombs. So, but I just can't see it.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember VE Day, Victory in Europe?
Yes, I do. Everybody celebrated. Everybody got out and made noise of some kind to celebrate the victory. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, how was life different after the war?
How was
Like
life
like
different
the years after the war?
Well, of course, things settled down, and of course, there were a lot of people without work, and because of the closing down of the bomb factories and so on, and it took a while for things to get going again and for work to pick up, that everybody could get a job.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I just wanted to say, as I said a while ago, that it really was a world war. China was involved, Japan was involved, all these countries in Asia and in Europe, And you could very easily see why it was called World War.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. War isn't the best thing in the world to have. Even though it makes lots of work for everybody, it still is not, to me, it's not the way you would want to make a living all the time. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's just really sad that we have to do that to have work.
Mm-hmm. Both your brothers came back from the war?
Both my brothers
Mhm.
came back.
That's
Neither
good.
one was injured or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but both brothers died at a young age.
Mm.
So,
Did they talk about their experience in the war
No.
at all?
you know,
Mm-hmm.
none of them hardly did
Mm-hmm.
talk about it.
Yeah. Were there
Too awful.
Yeah. Were there a lot of families that lost men,
Oh, yes.
boys?
Yes. One family lost, I think it was 5, they had 5 boys, and they were all drafted, and they lost all of them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Was it a farming family as well, or?
That wasn't a farming family. They lived in a little town.
Mm.
But one of the ways that they made money was to sell bonds,
Mm-hmm.
war bonds, they called them.
Yeah.
And like Clark bought them at work. When he got his paycheck,
Mm-hmm.
he had to take so much in bonds.
Mm.
And we had those for years before we ever cashed them,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And it was a way to save too.
Mm-hmm. So a bond is you are given a piece of paper that it's worth something
Mm-hmm.
a few years later,
Yeah,
right? So like if he got
I think
paid,
it was like 10 years.
okay.
Yeah.
So if he got part of his paycheck in, let's say he made $100, but he took 20 of that in bonds or 50 of that in bonds, then he couldn't cash them right away for $50.
No, you couldn't.
You would have to wait 10 years
Yeah.
to cash them. Cause then
Well,
they'd be worth
you could
$50.
cash them, but you didn't get your full amount.
Right, you wouldn't get the full
Yeah.
amount. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
And taxes, of course, as always. They got their money for the war from taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a rough time.
Well, thank you very
You're
much
welcome.
for sitting and talking with me. I appreciate it.